This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Today, I am just pleased as punch to introduce you to the man I'll be interviewing, and really what we're looking for which is pretty typical for our Welcome to Humanity podcast, is just shining a light on this man's spectacularity. It's not going to take very much today. And, sometimes I got to pull out the big lumens. But today we're going to be able to do it with a pin light. We're going to be able to do it because what we have here is a man who is just truly a spectacular contribution to humanity and having fun while he does it. So I should say a little bit about Stephen Sears. He's introduced to me by someone who just began to work with me, a mutual friend named Roselle. And Roselle, the way you got introduced to me is that Roselle was just like, when I gave her an open sort of carte blanche to introduce me to friends that she thought were either interesting or could carry on a compelling conversation, your name, it just popped up instantly. And that's really how it went. Oh, you got to do Stephen Sears. I'm like, okay, you got it. I'm in. Who is Stephen Sears? And then, she shared a little bit about her working with you and your biography, which, we talked a little bit about that. And I guess I can spend just a moment speaking to your biography. Yeah, Stephen Sears is a screenwriter, a producer, and an author. He's traveled a lot. He was born in a military family. And so he has visited, even before he was 13, he had visited 48 of the states of this country and 14 countries outside of here. And then, he's just been really accomplished. He went to the University of Florida, received Associate of Arts degree, and then went to Florida State. And, since then he moved to LA, and that's where his career appears to really have taken off like a good Los Angelino sometimes gets fortunate.
Wow. My goodness. I'm like, okay, thank you very much, folks. That'll be it for today. That was great.
It really comes down to, I have all sorts of more stuff, as we mentioned, that I could read directly from your bio, things that you're responsible or co-creating in your years that you have, your career as a writer, as a story editor, as a producer, multiple television shows and multiple different productions at multiple different levels, co-creating the latest TV incarnation of the comic book heroine Xena, written many films and stage animations, interactive comic books and novels. I mean, this is you. It's really you. And I know it's different when you hear it, right? It's different when you hear it than when you own it for yourself or you say it or you write it, right? There's a different experience when you hear somebody introducing you.
That is absolutely true.
Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know that you're a little squeamish, and I could keep going in this bio for another 25 minutes. Let's talk first about your reaction to be introduced, really, for the man you really are, by the way. I didn't say anything that isn't true. This is just hard, cold facts. Mm-hmm. What's your experience when you hear all this about yourself?
It is very interesting. My initial reaction to that, when people talk about my career. And, I do go back fairly far back into television and film. For those of you who don't know, I was actually one of the staff writers on the original A-Team series. That's how far
Yay.
back I go.
Yay, Mr. T,
Um,
right?
Indeed, yes. He was great.
Yeah.
And I've worked on a lot of different shows, and I've been very fortunate to have branched out into a lot of different areas. Now doing the author thing as well as graphic novels, et cetera, et cetera. But when I hear somebody else talk about it, my first reaction is I want to say, but eventually I'll figure out what I want to do with my life and I'll
I
go get a job.
so got that.
And it's a truism.
Yes, yes.
It's interesting. I was talking to my wife just recently, who's also an author, Jessica Bronner, and we were talking about what would our autobiographies be called? What were the titles? And I kind of like looked at my life and I said, well, I guess the best way to express it would be this. Well, I didn't see that coming.
That's
And
the title. That's the title of your
that's the
book.
title of my autobiography.
I love it.
Because I've been very fortunate in this regard. I've been pursuing my heart for my entire life. And it hasn't always been, just like roses and everything, but I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. And it's worked. So it's that old saying of, if you love what you do, then you never work a day in your life.
Mhm.
Well, I'm still loving this, but I was told that someday I have to work. So I'm still kind of waiting for that. Eventually I'll get that job, hopefully at that restaurant where I can be the waiter I've always intended to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I share a little bit. I have a very extensive CV, and people ask me, well, how is it that you got to every corner of psychiatry in this one lifetime? And it's like, well, by the time I realized that the job I had wasn't working for me, I was on to the next job. And so, it's just like, oh yeah, thank you for the opportunity to see this, and now I'm going to go do something else. And now it looks like a CV that is a well-accomplished psychiatrist, but really I'm looking for the time where I can finally get out of that business and find out what my life is really about.
Yeah. And the interesting thing in harmony with that is that I never intended to be a writer. I never did. That was totally fortuitous, but accidental. And, it's one of those things where I was fortunate enough not to put blinders on myself because I had that same feeling that you did. I call it the flashy object thing. It's like, oh, there's a flashy object. I'm going to go play with that. And I'm playing with it. And as I'm playing with it, oh, there's another flashy object. Hold on. You stay here. You stay here. I'm going to go play with that one. And then you go play with that one. And then there's another flashy object and you go play with that one. And eventually you have an entire life of being able to play with these flashy objects that fascinate you. But for me, I never intended to be a writer. That just happened. And it blossomed into this entire life that I had. When I think it was 15 years into my career as a professional writer, I got a letter from the Writers Guild, which said, you've been doing this for 15 years, you're now some sort of status. I forgot what they called it, but it was some sort of elite status. And I read this letter. I was sitting next to the person I was dating at the time. And I read this letter and I turned to her and I went, oh my God, I just had a career. What? Literally it was like a cartoon character's head spinning back and forth.
Like, oh my God, I put back a career. Like, oh, look at that. I didn't even notice.
Wow.
I've just lived a career. It's so great.
Yeah.
It really is. So tell us a little bit more about, the interface between what were you doing when you didn't even know you were having a career? What did that life look like when you were just, trafficking in between the next shiny objects? And what's your experience of having lived a life chasing down your heart and, looking and continuing to do the things that you love, on the way to eventually getting a real job?
Wow. That's such a great question. And I've got to simplify it in my head. Well, let me backtrack a little bit and just say how I did end up in this particular area that I'm in. As you mentioned, I'm a military brat, grew up in military bases. Every 3 years we moved. When we retired, I went to high school. This was in St. Augustine, Florida, which is my hometown. And one of the things that, as a military brat, since you move every 3 years, one of the things you have to do is you have to make new friends. Every 3 years, it's a new environment, it's a new world. The real core of your life is your family because they travel with you, and also the sense of military structure on a base. And so some kids adjust to that by becoming very introverted. They kind of withdraw. Other kids basically try to make friends and become like a class clown, which is what I became.
Me too.
And also I like to tell stories. So when we retired, my dad retired, and we moved to St. Augustine, I was in the high school there, and I basically got involved with the arts department in band and theater and those particular things because they were fun, they were creative, they were ways for me to explore all of these things that were going inside of my head. So my dad had retired and became the administrator of a medical company that had built a hospital. So of course, when I went to college, immediately I went pre-med. Mm-hmm. And as I told many other people, that lasted until Chem 101 knocked me into liberal arts.
Yeah.
I got a C in chemistry. That wasn't going to hack it as a doctor. Mm-hmm. And I went through a few epiphany moments, and one of them had to deal with a movie which had just come out. The actor was Richard Dreyfuss, and people were telling me that, they were comparing him to me. And I saw the movie, and I'd been doing acting, and I was like, I could have played that role, ha, 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 ha. And then later on, he won an Academy Award for that. It was The Goodbye Girl. Mm-hmm. And I was walking toward the student union one time thinking about that. And I was thinking to myself, he won an Academy Award for playing me. That's interesting. So I thought, that's an Oscar, and only special people get those. And I literally stopped in my tracks at that moment. And I said, oh my God, if Richard Dreyfuss had ever felt that way, he never would have gotten near that award. And I realized at that moment, what I really love doing is performing. Mm-hmm. I love acting. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to pursue a medical degree. I'm going to be an actor. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to a school that has a theater department, a really substantial one. University of Florida had one, but Florida State was known for this. And so I transferred to Florida State. Mm. Now, I called my dad, and I told him that I wasn't going to be a doctor, that I was going to be an actor. And my dad did not even hesitate. He said, son, you've always loved it. You go do it.
Wow.
I had great parents. I had wonderful parents.
I guess so.
My family, my brother, my parents were just great.
That's rubber to the road. Great dad. That's great.
It really was. Mm-hmm. And they were my biggest supporters. So I got my degree in theater, moved out to Los Angeles to be an actor. Now, believe it or not, I'm trying to shorten the story down.
That's fine.
I told you I'm a storyteller. Ask me the time of day, I give you the history of the watch.
Yes.
So I started taking acting classes and writing my own audition scenes, mostly because casting directors were seeing the same material over and over again. Basically, after a while, my scenes became popular in other schools and classes. At the same time, I actually was working at a restaurant as a waiter, and I met a guy named Bert Pearl. He and I became best friends, and he also had this kind of interest in writing. Now, keep in mind, I was still an actor. I was not a writer. I had no intention of being a writer. So he and I started writing scripts together, and literally just for the fun of it. That was all we were doing. There was nothing to go farther than that. It was just because we enjoyed it. At one of those showcases where my scenes were being performed, a casting director asked me about whether I was a writer or not. And I said, no, I'm not a writer. I always remember this. I said, no, I couldn't do something. And then that night, I immediately thought, well, why can't I do it? So I started writing up some scripts. Anyway, so Bert and I were writing these scripts together. And there was a show that had just come on the air called Riptide. Very, very popular show, but the pilot had just aired. And so Bert and I were going to write a script about Riptide. And I called the Riptide production offices to get a writer's guide. Again, no intention of being a writer. Got into a wonderful conversation with this woman there. We talked about almost 80% of it had nothing to do with the business. We just had a conversation. And then at the end of it, she said, well, if you and your partner have written anything, and if you have an agent, send the material over. The producers are always looking for new writers. And I went, oh, great. And she didn't get my name. I didn't get her name. I contacted an agent that we knew. He sent over the material. Within a month, they called us in for a meeting. And off of that, Bert and I got an assignment. And off of the first draft, we were hired on staff. Now, keep in mind, we had no intention of being writers. Mm-hmm. This was totally accidental. Mm-hmm. When we left the office after we were told we had the assignment, Bert turned to me and he said, are we getting paid? Because we didn't even know writers got paid. So anyway, that started my career. But relevant to the question, though, is that for the first 3 years, I went through the imposter phenomena.
Yeah.
I was convinced that at any moment they were going to realize I was a total fraud, a total fake, because I'd never studied this. I never went to school for this. And yet here I am with, Stephen J. Cannell, Babs Grayhowski, Tom Blomquist, Frank Lupo, Patrick Hasberg, all of these people who were considered to be, they all had hit shows. And I was working with. And so it took me about 3 years of obsessing that this was going to be lost in just a moment and I should prepare for that. And then one day I realized, I just said to myself, you know what? This is your life. This is what you're doing. So do it. Just do it. And when it runs its course, you'll do something else. Don't worry about it.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much what started that whole philosophy of like, I didn't see that coming.
Hmm. So there's a space here where there's two things that come, well, many things. Thank you for backdrop. I really get a couple of things that are important to you. Like, it doesn't seem like the half life of the word no is very long for you.
I have a thing about that word. Yes, you are
Y-
correct.
Yeah, can you do this? No, that does, we can start to stopwatch then,
Hmm.
about how many minutes or hours that no becomes. Well, of course I can. What's next? Something like that. If it rings your bell, that there was adventure, there was exploration, there was, and then accomplishment, accolades, there was achievement, and then there was the blood, sweat, and tears, as well as the backdrop, at least for the first 3 years of this imposter syndrome that was probably consuming you at a pretty high level
Hmm.
on any given minute, right? You knew that any given minute, the goons are going to step up and say, look, we made a mistake. It's very clear that you're not who we thought we were. And, don't let the door hit you and lose our number.
Hmm.
Something like that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and then instead, what happens is, at 3 years, there's almost an epiphany of affirmation. There's something like, "Oh, this is my life. This is what I do. So let's get it on, and we'll get it on like until it's done. We'll get it on here and no worries. It's almost like if it runs its course, then it will, and then we'll move on to something. We'll move on to what's ever next."
Yeah, that is pretty much it. And the other way of looking at it is that when this runs its course, I'll find another flashy light, and when that runs its course, I'll find another flashy light, and when that runs its course, and always at the end of it was this idea, going back to how we started this, was this idea that, well, eventually I'll get a job.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Eventually you'll find something that you're supposed to do or that you are here to do or that takes some effort to do or that, you get paid and put your time in or something like that, like a real
Yeah.
job, like most people somehow do.
Well, let's go back to that word no,
Yeah.
because that's very important. And I'm going to mention some philosophy and philosophic beliefs that I have because most of what I talk about when I'm asked to talk to classes about working in this industry actually deals with philosophy. The mechanics are fairly simple, but it's kind of like, how do you break in? Well, there are mechanics to that, and you can understand those. The really hard thing is, how do you stay in the business? And that means not just getting jobs, how do you keep your core self in this particular business? So I'm going to go back to that word no. And as I said, some of this is going to be, I kind of frame it, I put it in framework that certainly has gray, tattered edges to it, but the core is still there. So if you imagine the idea, the concept that souls who are born, children, when they come into this world, they just came from the universe. So let's say, for a philosophical argument, I could put forward the idea that they just came from the totality of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, children have all the knowledge of the universe, they just came from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they are born, the first thing that happens is that they have to be put into a structure that's very limited from where they just came from.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is language. And what is the first word that children hear most often? No,
Mm.
no, 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 honey, no, no.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's very well intentioned. It's, part of our survival gene. We want to make sure that children learn so they don't do the wrong things. But what happens, though, is that every no builds a wall, and it builds a wall around all of us. All these no's are, don't go there, don't do this, don't extend that. It's a no, 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 no. And what I found as I grew older, and what I found with a lot of other people, is that most people, in fact, I'm only saying most because I can't have absolute knowledge, are very creative and very, very much want to expand themselves and want to explore things, but their own walls have trapped them. So most of freeing yourself, most of freeing your creativity is learning how to break down your own walls. So every time I hear the word no, I remind myself that I still have walls to break down. Why would I build another one?
That's fascinating. So I'm willing to go out to the edges of where I've been and maybe in most cases actually go out a little further than I've ever been. But
Mm-hmm.
on the furthest edge of wherever I go is the word no.
Mm-hmm.
There is another opportunity to take another step in that same direction or, another step into what I want or what's drawing me forward. And then at some level, all things considered, I go to no. And that's just the end of where I've been. It's like mitigated by the fact that maybe I've gone further than I've ever gone. And so down this particular pathway, and that's good enough for now. And I think any further than this would either be unsafe, unwise, ill-advised. There's like, okay, they're not unnecessary, or maybe it's even opportunistic, or self-serving, or dangerous. Whatever idea I have, there's a no sitting out there at the edge of whatever I take on. Otherwise, I would keep going. I would just keep
Mhm.
going and going and going.
True. But you're the one who sets that no. That's the difference.
Hmm.
And I think that's the important thing. Yeah, obviously you just don't want to go into malignant narcissism and just, everything is open and wide open despite other people's considerations. But it's where you set the boundaries. That's
Hmm.
the important thing. One thing I tell young actors who come out to Hollywood, I tell them, I said, you're going to be working with a lot of words. Scripts are all about, it's a lot of words in there. It's all about story, but there's a lot of words there. But the most important word you have to remember actually is the word no. Because when you do it, you define yourself to
Hmm.
other people. When other people do it to you, they're trying to contain you. So that's the primary difference, is how you assign it.
Yes. So I recently had an opportunity with a very particularly strong plant medicine ally in the woods in a Vision Quest clone about a couple weeks ago. And the dosage I received was what it was. And I didn't have quite the same effect as some of the other folks that were sitting in the circle with.
Mm-hmm.
So then the second dose came and I took that as well. And I still didn't have that effect. They got this effect, but not that effect. So then he came by and it was like a third dose. And a lot of people had gotten a second dose, but the third dose was kind of based on the idea that maybe I was getting, not enough of the effect or something. And so he gave me the third dose. And I still didn't get the effect. And you know what, Steve? This next time he came around, number 4, there was new parameters. There were new variables for me to deal with. And probably the most powerful moment of this weekend was me saying no to that fourth dose.
Hmm.
There was something like, wait, at this point, I'm grasping for straws. At this point,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not believing that what has happened is all that needed to happen. At this point, I'm hoarding, or I want my money's worth, or, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, looking at all things, there was a no that seemed like it was more in tune with what the universal frequency was asking me to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the no became an affirmative, actually,
Mm-hmm.
affirmation of this thing called me making a choice.
Absolutely. That's correct. That is absolutely correct. Yeah, I believe that. I agree with you 100%. As I said, that's when you are you're basically defining yourself
Mm-hmm.
with that. And it takes a certain amount of awareness for people to be able to do that. A lot of times, I think, in a very strange way of expressing it, you got to overcome the wall nose to get to your affirmation nose.
Interesting. Affirmation knows. I love that. Yeah, it's exactly right. The ones that came from the outside need to be pushed out of the way so you can actually get to the one that's coming from inside or coming from soul. Yeah.
Yeah. And in Hollywood, especially because it's such a subjective business, you need to know your core. You need to know who you are to be able to survive this business. Everybody's going to tell you who you are, and everybody's going to use every fear you have to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, well, I hate to paint everybody as being total evil, but I'm just saying the business itself, because the business is a hard business.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea that once you are no longer useful, you are cast aside, that is true,
Mm-hmm.
because, it is show biz, money, money. It is
Mm-hmm.
about the business. But as long as you know your core and know who you are, it's really hard to be preyed upon. And you will always have, I hope, a correct assessment of your place within it, but also your abilities within it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. It is so totally subjective. So why can't you make it the best possible world you can?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like being aligned with myself, or oneself in that setting is what it's almost like it's enough to pass the audition already. If I can show up as me, whether or not I'm accepted for the part, or whether or not I'm hired as a co-creator, or whether or not my screenplay gets accepted, it's almost like that isn't the measure. The measure is if I show up as myself, or if I show up authentically, if I show up standing for whatever it is I am at that given time, then I continue to win.
Exactly. You're right. Like I've always said about auditions, when somebody says, I got the audition, then I had to walk out and I just obsessed for days about whether I got the job. I was like, what do you mean? You already won. You had the audition. Wasn't that fun? You had a chance, if it was an actor, you had a chance to perform. You became the character. You got to live that out. the job will come later, not this particular one or not that particular one. You could have been rejected because, you were too tall or too short or something beyond your control. I learned a lot about acting after I became a writer because now I was on the other side of the table watching actors come in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so simple to say this, but the victory really is in the journey and your dedication to it. That's the victory to this.
Sometimes it is. I mean, with all compassion for us humans, there seems to, we strive for something called relief by this illusion that someday we're going to arrive somewhere and finally be able to exhale as if we got to where we were going in the first place or something. And in fact, this idea of a mountain without a top, or, the journey and not the destination, the idea that we really, all the pleasure comes from the adventure of heading towards a goal, and that, actually arriving at the goal isn't, where the real cash is. Like the real payoff is in appreciating the journey as we're going through. That's easy to say, and certainly easy to say to another person, but, there really is this pull towards the comfort of having arrived somewhere, or some sort of, I don't know, some sort of sense of me having accomplished what I set out to do. Now, in your case, and I get to speak to, as you might have seen with other people that I've interviewed for this podcast, I get to speak to some pretty cool artists. At some point, the piece is done. At some point, you really are turning in your screenplay. At some point, you really are turning in the part or the piece or whatever it is. You're like, okay, this is good enough, or this is now ready to be circulated or to change hands or to be given to, the director. What's the experience that happens to you when there's that resonating kaboom that knows, or that at least willing to believe that this is good enough to submit, that your work is good enough to submit as complete and ready to be assessed?
Well, I want to make a differentiation, first of all. The difference between a life pursuit and a project pursuit. So this is talking about a project pursuit. In the life pursuit thing, very quickly, one thing I have asked students when I've been invited to speak at classes is I will ask students what their goals are. And I'll go around the room and somebody will say, I want to create a pilot for a new series. Somebody will say, I want to write the new Pixar movie. Another one will, I want to be a lead in a Marvel film, all these things. And when they're done, I very politely tell them, okay, you're all wrong. Everybody is wrong here. I'm going to be arrogant enough to tell you you're all wrong, because I know what your goal is. Your one goal. You all have the same goal. Your one goal is to be happy.
Of course. That's like, he better say that, because that's
exactly.
Yeah.
I said, what'll make you miserable is trying to figure out how to get there. However, the thing is that once you set a goal, goals for me, those are directions. But again, you don't put blinders on, because if you're so focused on that goal, either you're never going to achieve it and you're going to feel like you were, inadequate, or you will achieve it and then you say, okay, now where do I go? And sometimes when you achieve that goal, the fireworks don't go off the way you expected them to. But these are all directions, and everybody should have them, directions for the journey. Now that's on the spiritual life level. Now the project level, interestingly enough, the question you asked is, when do I know a project is ready to go out? It's never ready to go out. It's never done. The way that I know that my screenplay is finished is when I have sold it, I've cashed the check, and I have no control over it whatsoever. That's when it is done. As a creative person, as a writer, I cannot look at any of my material without realizing that I could have made other choices and wondering where that would have taken me. For every 2 hours somebody sees of a movie, or an hour or half an hour of a TV show or whatever, you're only seeing basically about 120 pages of what was shot if it's a movie. What you're not seeing is the thousands of papers that the writer went through, either literally or in their mind, making all these different choices that could have changed everything. The smallest change of a word, the change of a character interpretation, writing an entire screenplay, then realizing you missed something right at the beginning you should have realized, and then rewriting the whole thing. That will constantly happen. I have a problem looking at things that I've produced, shows that I've done, scripts that have been produced, and films. I don't go back and watch those episodes because I kind of sit there and squirm and go, oh my gosh, if I had done this, gosh, wouldn't that have been better? It could have gone here, it could have gone there. But I have to compartmentalize. And I think that's really what happens. At a certain point, I compartmentalize and I put it back on the shelf and say, you're now done with this. but I'm never officially done with the creative aspect of it. It's always going to be there. Now, at a certain point, for any screenwriter, when do you think your material is ready to be shown to other people? Part of the process of screenwriting is getting critiques from people. So you hopefully give your material to people you trust to give you an honest opinion. And also, as a second part, you understand the person you're giving it to, so you understand what their approach to your material is. And you listen for the critiques. It's lovely and wonderful to hear the compliments, and I love hearing the compliments, but compliments don't invite you to grow. Compliments invite you to cement yourself because, oh, you love that, I shouldn't touch it. Maybe not. Maybe you should. Maybe you should look at it in a different perspective. But the criticisms from somebody who is honestly trying to help helps you grow, but you have to be able to give them the benefit of the doubt. So anytime I hand out my work to other people, I assume they're right. When they say, this is completely wrong, you did this wrong, you should have changed this, my first thought isn't, well, they didn't see what I'm doing. They didn't see my vision. No, my first thought is, okay, all right, well, he's an audience. He saw something. I've got to take a look at that. She pointed out the same thing, so I got to look at her note here. I've got to take it seriously so that I can consider it objectively. And then at a certain point, you either just realize it's working, you're enjoying it as best you can, and it's time to send it out there into the professional world to see what the reaction is going to be. Or, in many cases, you're just tired of it. Let's just get it out there now.
Yeah, so it's working or I'm spent. I mean, it's just like, okay, this is just as good as it's going to get for now, or it's good enough to have won the approval of some of my metrics, other people or some accepting level, and therefore it's sort of done for now. I'm ready to turn it in.
Yeah.
You spoke about this gift. It's really interesting. The gift of genuine feedback, the gift that some of our friends or some of our colleagues step into the space of genuine feedback and in fact compliments, although they feel good. We're back to that same idea of being on the edge. A compliment, when seeking comfort, a compliment fits that bill. If what hi, was that good enough? Was that good enough? Yes. Oh, good. Like that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're mostly talking about continued growth and development in the area of creativity or self-expression or impact that we're making on contribution to others. And in those areas, what we're really seeking is pointed, authentic, genuine, heartfelt, real feedback. And doesn't it take something to just stand inside that feedback? Even it's like, Steve, the way that character is being doesn't match, we see you worked hard on that, but that character is antithetical to what we were really looking for. Now, part of me, if I hear something like that, would be to defend why I made the character the way I did, argue for my previous work as being, in fact, nothing less than acceptable or adequate. But the space of opening my heart up, opening my listening for feedback so that I can continue to grow, to improve, to develop, that there is some, I don't know, there is some maturity, if you will, or some, discipline or some humility that's involved there that's not always easy to call up. Is that your experience, or have you gotten past that to where, yeah, you're ready and always open to genuine feedback?
There are always aspects of our humanity which are very primal based, and we are always going to react to those things. I mean, this all propaganda manipulation, the way we recognize certain things, the way we stereotype certain things, a lot of that comes from very primal evolutionary genetics that we evolved mostly to protect ourselves, but also to be able to function in a community. And so what happens is that this aspect is kind of a part of that. We're all built in with the immediate, you are criticizing me, therefore I want to defend myself. You're attacking me. I am required now to defend myself.
Right.
And that is what we're responding to. And I would be, inhuman if I were to say to you, oh, yeah, it doesn't bother me. Never have that going through. Ridiculous. Of course I do. However, I've had to realize what the function of this particular criticism is. It's not me. We're talking about my work.
Interesting. Right.
I also look at it as saying what you are telling me is your opinion of how I can improve my work.
Right.
And therefore, you're not my enemy. You're my biggest supporter.
Right.
You're trying to help me here.
Right.
So there's a book I wrote about working in the business, and there's a whole chapter on how you take notes and how you give notes. And a lot of the times you're going to get notes from people who you recognize very early on. They don't have the same story mind that you do. However, they do have a pen that signs a check, and you're going to listen to them. So I wrote up a very easy guide for how people can handle notes. And it's very, very simple. First of all, as you know, if you can record the meeting, absolutely, because you want to remember what they said. But no matter what they say, no matter what their comments are, what their notes are, these are your responses. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Well, there's an area I haven't explored. I've got to put that down here. I'm not sure I see it completely, but let me think on that one. Those are your responses. And you swallow the pride.
Yeah.
You swallow the defensiveness, because what you're supposed to be doing is listening. Now, when you have the distance between yourself and the person, and you're able to go through this list, you're able to look at it hopefully objectively. And by giving the responses that you did in the meeting, you have not artificially created an adversarial position with this person. So therefore, you now don't have to swallow your pride to say, oh my God, I hated that in the meeting, but he's right. You don't have to do that. At the same time, the person you're talking to, and the person who's giving you the information, becomes more comfortable with you. They're like, okay, this person, this writer is going to seriously consider my input. I like that about this person. I'm going to hire this person again. And when you turn in your work, you are actually given more leeway in your final decision, because the person who gave you the notes has already given you the benefit of the doubt that you will actually give their notes full consideration. Now, I've seen this in practice. This has happened many times. It's a philosophy that I follow. And again, I always take somebody else's note as being absolutely correct, so that I can then confront it myself and figure out whether it is or not. And if it is, no problem. Boom, it goes into the script. I don't have a problem with that at all. It just makes the script better. My name's going to be on it either way. So for me, it is basically just trying to alter my perspective on what that interaction is. It's not the attack, so therefore I don't have to be defensive.
It seems like that's really the pathway. You might get a breakthrough in the industry, even from non-Los Angeles, you're over there in Minneapolis, and you might get a breakthrough because you graduated the proper art school, or you had a good mentor, and someone actually takes the time to become interested in your work or your piece. And that's like maybe the original breakthrough in the industry. But I think what you're talking about here, I think you had mentioned it earlier in our conversation, like not only how do you sustain yourself, this idea of living through auditions that you don't win, but how do you grow and develop, had some accomplishments, continuing the uphill, continuing to grow and develop, continuing to learn from beginner's mind, continuing to be a student of the arts, or, one who is ready, willing, and open to feedback, and then, implementation of proper criticism into the script or into the work, into the acting role. That seems like the pathway to brilliance, the pathway to stardom inside of any industry, not just the entertainment industry. Your thoughts about that?
I agree. And unfortunately, we have to use like words that either have negative or positive connotations, and they shouldn't. They're functional words. I think that challenging yourself is actually you being your biggest critic. I have lived my life in a manner that the only way I can express it is that I seem to watch myself from cameras. I look at myself, not in the, my gosh, I'm so gorgeous, look at the picture of me. I literally examine everything that I do. Part of that is just the way my mind functions. I'm a deconstructionist. Everything has to be deconstructed into its simplest components to solve the problem, then rebuild from there. Kind of do the same thing with myself. So the way that I have managed to grow, and the way others, I believe, can release themselves and allow themselves to grow, is by examining themselves and realizing there's nothing negative about what they're doing. There's a phrase I came up with. A lot of these phrases end up in my scripts. My characters are smarter than I am.
Yeah.
But it was something that I actually went through at one point toward the end of my imposter phenomena, because I was so worried about losing my job. There I was in an office, and I was even working when the show wasn't on the air. During hiatus, I came into that office and nobody was in the building. But I was like, the moment I don't show up, they're going to fire me, because everything, the dominoes are going to fall. And one of the things that popped into my head, which ended the imposter phenomena, was a very simple thing. I'm only human. Now, when I realized that was the most terrifying thing that ever could have popped into my head. And yet it was the most liberating thing of my existence, because I realized I am only human. I will make mistakes. I will learn from them. I will grow. I will become a better person, but I've got to forgive myself. I've got to be able to make these mistakes. Otherwise, I will go nowhere. I will sit here with concrete shoes and not move.
Extremely well said. Very beautiful. Thank you. We are here, Welcome to Humanity, and it's kind of built essentially on this whole idea of, for instance, you're not mentally ill, you're just human. Like what we have here is the opportunity to really embrace everything it means to be human. And for me, and I'd love to hear your ideas of this, when I underperform, I say I'm going to do something, or I have some dream or aspiration to have a particular thing done by a particular day, and then it doesn't happen the way I intended. That's one thing. But there's another piece that's a little bit, for me, a little bit more difficult to metabolize. And that's when I turn into a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really not nice all of a sudden. Like I'm treating people rudely. Like, wow, look how much of an a-hole I am.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look how much of a concrete, like a concrete, dense brain I have. Look at how my heart is not involved in this. Look at how I'm willing to stomp on somebody or abuse my power. Look at how nasty I can wish harm on a sentient being. Like those things are a little bit more difficult for me to just encapsulate. No worries, Fred, you're a human. It's like, no. I'm just being an asshole. And I get that being an asshole is at the center of being a human, but those, I just feel like they're a little bit harder for me to just roll in as just being okay.
Well, I'm laughing not because I think you are an asshole. However,
it wouldn't take you long. It wouldn't.
Like conceptually, now the I'm only human thing is not an excuse to be carte blanche with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what that comes down to is what your core of the definition human is. For somebody, they may define that in a way that I would consider to be abhorrent. So I have to go with my particular definition. That means I'm a better being. I'm a person who is more considerate, more aware of myself and what my actions can do to others. But the reason I was kind of chuckling through that is that one of the things that I've also mentioned to aspiring artists in this business is I will tell them, I say, when you become successful, when people start to acknowledge your creativity, they're going to tell you how wonderful you are. They are going to remind you, and the money will come, the accolades will come, the awards will come, and my gosh, you're going to feel really good about that. And here's the thing I'm going to guarantee you. You will, at one point in your career, be a total asshole. That's going to happen. I don't care how nice you are right now. That's going to happen because everybody is telling you you're so wonderful, you can't do any wrong. Now, the key to surviving in this business is how quickly you can realize that and overcome it. And if you can't overcome it, you really don't work. We hear a lot of stories about people like, whatever happened to them? And you find out, well, they did this and they did that, and they were gone. Difficult actors, difficult writers, difficult directors, anybody who's difficult, they don't work again. A lot of people mistake certain qualities. Like I always use James Cameron as an example because a lot of people will say, well, James Cameron is an asshole and look how successful he is. Actually, no, James Cameron is not an asshole. He's a perfectionist. That's different. He expects the best out of people. That is a completely different thing. He expects the best out of himself. So I look back on my career and I know exactly when it happened to me, and I was fortunate. I caught it immediately. I knew what I did and I was able to fix it at the moment. It was a very simple thing. I was at a party. I was with somebody. We were having an argument with somebody I was involved with. And this young person, walked up and said, Mr. Sears, I just want to tell you, I'm just a huge fan of yours. I love what you've done, and I love the things that you write and you produce. And I was in the middle of this argument. I turned and I said, yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. You mind? I'm doing something. I turned back to the person. And as soon as I started talking, I stopped. And I looked and I saw this guy walking away with his shoulders completely slumped. And I turned to the person. I said, I just became an asshole. And I got up and I went after the guy and I apologized to him. But I remembered that because I didn't see it coming. And there it was. So you're absolutely right on that. One of the recognitions of I'm only human is that we can make mistakes like that, which can hurt other people. But can you learn from it? Can you recover? And can you realize that it's not necessary to do it?
It's interesting because en route, what would take me more than 1 second after realizing I was an asshole? What would take me more than 1 second to right that wrong? And it's because there's some sort of dark fuel to, well, there's a part of me that's like rubbing my hands together, like, well, yeah, but kind of feels good, or like, oh, yeah, vicariously giving up my responsibility for whatever just occurred and giving it to somebody else for having screwed me over or, misheard me or misinterpreted me or misrepresented me. Like if I can blame someone else for for that. There's something that appears, at least at the small self level, to be relinquishing responsibility for my life and thereby just handing over a big heavy weight to somebody else as if they're responsible for, for my pain or discomfort. And then I might continue to be an asshole in that situation. Like, well, yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to be, now that I've been an asshole for the last 7 minutes or 7 hours or 7 days, there's no reason to turn back that tide now. We got a little, we got a stride going here. And then at one point, it really is, oh my goodness, that was a tough run. I need to go back and right my wrong. I need to make amends. I need to, like clean up the mess I made and acknowledge that I've been nothing less than a sheer asshole. And thank you very much for a lot. Is there anything I can do? Is there anything I can do now? Because my intention is no longer to be an asshole with you or anyone else like this. And my goodness, there's something like that's about as big a man as I know how to be is when I'm doing that stuff. Like that's doesn't get, in some ways, it's sort of very painful to acknowledge it. In other ways, on the other side of it is about the biggest man I know how to be.
Yes, and that's true. You've got to overcome yourself to rise to that level. There are certainly things that I look back on my past and I say, you know what? I hurt somebody. I didn't know it at the time, but I hurt somebody. I mean, there are people who just vicariously, they're covering up their insecurities by being arrogant and being assholes. That's a different situation. I've never taken any joy at anybody being hurt because of me.
Right.
I can look back at my past and I can realize I probably hurt that person. I didn't know it at the time, but I did. And I always look at those things as I've got two possibilities. One, if I can fix it, I fix it. If I can't fix it, I have to remember it and learn from it. So that nobody else is hurt by this again. I'm not wired for regret. As a result of that, I think the regret can be a good thing, but I also think that regret can trap you in the past and you can't free yourself. So that's why my philosophy has always been, with my little cameras outside of me, is keep an eye on yourself. Remember all the things that you have learned and make sure that you're still applying them. When I was young, especially in relationships, I was very insecure. As I said, we moved from town to town to town to town, and I became the class clown. Well, part of that, being a class clown, is doing the classic psychological mask. I was basically developing masks because the core of me, I didn't really want people to see. So I wanted them to like me. So they couldn't like me. How could they like me? But I want to make a mask. And by the way, that's the core of me wanting to be on stage as an actor. Masks. I was never had to be me. It was always behind the character. So if you applauded me, you were applauding the character, kept that insecurity away. And if you criticize me, you were criticizing the character. So that kept that insecurity away. But it carried over in relationships. So a lot of the times, people I dated when I was a teenager, I was a mask until we were in a relationship. And then I was kind of like a jerk. I didn't think about it at the time. I always rationalized it by saying, well, I'm just being me. No, I'm not. I was being an insecure little child. So I grew out of that, thankfully. Now, I make a very careful distinction. I say I grew out of it. I didn't say I freed myself from it because I am, again, only human. But by growing out of it, I became those little cameras looking back at myself. So I had to learn from those things.
I think it goes without saying, thank you for that, but I'd love to hear your view on this, that some of your created characters, your co-created characters, get to do the things that you otherwise either wouldn't do or couldn't do, or even respond to the way they manage each other or themselves, whatever bad habits they have or whatever habits that are, human but abhorrible. I think that's a word, abhorrent. When you become an actor or a screenplay writer, it seems like you can divvy out a little bit of this and give it to a sub character that you created and see how it unfolds in that story. I'm just guessing here, but am I tapping on a nerve? Is there something there?
It's a very, very good question and conversation. And maybe every writer has a different way of responding to it. Interestingly enough, every character has bits of me, obviously, because that's where these characters are coming from. Even when I'm writing somebody else's characters, there are going to be bits in me. We have to find a communion between me and the character that I'm creating. I think more with my style, if I'm doing something extremely negative with a character, a flaw in the character or a villain in the character, I'm looking for the effect that the audience will have to that particular character. And again, I go back to, badly expressed, those little cameras that are always watching me. I look at how that affected me looking back at myself. So I can borrow things from myself. I can borrow things from my history and I can put them into my characters. But all characters are real to me because they have to be. They have to make sense. And I'm very complete with the way that I study my characters. Even if I don't write down a complete character bio, I can talk for hours about an individual character.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of executives at studios who can back that up.
I'll bet.
They're
Yeah.
looking at their watch. And even though what I'm talking about the character won't all appear on the screen, if I can talk 2 hours about a particular character, not all of that is going to end up on the screen.
Sure.
But what I say to them, I tell them, I say, look, this character is all coming out of me, and it's coming out of my experience, observations of other people, and my way of trying to humanize the character so it's not a caricature. And I said, but my best friend, okay, I've known my best friend for 30 years. I could probably tell you a lot about this person, but what I know about him is probably only 20% of who he actually is. So as somebody who's creating these characters, I don't have to just know the 20% I'm going to put on the paper the audience will see. I have to know the 80% as well, the stuff that nobody ever knows about, because that makes that person who that person is. So a lot of that I also apply to myself in my communion with my particular characters. I don't take any, maybe it's a definitional thing, I don't take any type of joy in the mistakes or the evil that some of my characters might do. I do have a philosophy that no villain is a villain. There's no villain that considers himself to be a villain. That's a caricature. Snidely Whiplash is a caricature. Real villains, you realize they have a logic, and that's what scares you. It's like talking about, there are two characters in Western civilization that cannot be written correctly. They can't. One of them is Jesus Christ. There's no way you can write that character correctly and have everybody agree. And the other is Adolf Hitler.
Right. Again, I was hoping you'd say those two. That was the best I could come up with. Yeah.
And with both of those characters, one is the personification of absolute good. The one is the personification of absolute evil. So we automatically categorize them in our minds. But here's the thing about Hitler. I thought you'd never hear that phrase. Here's the thing about Hitler. The millions and millions and millions that he killed, the changing of the world environment, the absolute core evil about this man. Hitler loved dogs. I love dogs. The fact that I could have a pleasant conversation with Hitler about dogs terrifies me.
Totally fascinating. Oh my God.
And that's how I write my villains.
Yeah.
I want the audience to identify with the villain, and that will terrify them because they have something in common with the evil.
That's brilliant. Well, it's kind of a funky place to taper off from. And it would taper off from the bottom of the pond. And there's something like really, it's an opportunity, I think, to take this conversation to the surface and let's push off from the bottom of the pond. And thank you. I totally get that. And I also am terrified about having conversations with, look, I have it that I am all those people. I am everyone who I think is evil. I am that person, and that person. That's how I know that they're evil. It's like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me if I would be evil or some version of that. And I'm sure we could go on and on about that. But I really just appreciate the succinctness of, how, oh yeah, Hitler, he's one of my human brothers.
Isn't that horrible? I mean, but
I'm
that's
sorry.
it.
Did you just say that? It's like, well, yeah, I did. Because he is.
Yeah.
And yeah. Oh, by the way, Jesus too. But yeah, they're just human brothers. That's what they are. Fascinating. Well, beautifully stated, Stephen. Thank you so much. Why don't you let our listeners know? I mean, they're going to want to follow you. They're going to want to learn from you or learn about you or see what you're up to next. Maybe tap into your space, ask you a question. How would some of our listeners, if they wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Sure. My actual business name and my branded name for writing and everything is Stephen L. Sears, Stephen with a V, L in the middle. And in my business, your name is your brand. So that's actually important. I'm not Stephen Sears. I'm not Steve Sears, registered as Stephen L. Sears. And if you want to know why that's important, my website is stephenlsears.com. Written as one word. If you go to stephensears.com, you'll find another website, which is actually a nice little website about how children clean their ears.
Nice. You got to know
Stephen's
that.
Ears.
You got to know that. Yeah.
So you can find me through that. You can go to stephenlsears.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on the usual social media. If you just search for me, I will come up. You'll see my smiling face and hat. Oh, the hat actually gets more work than I do. I wear a fedora. On Twitter, I am FSU Writer. I think on Instagram, I'm also FSU Writer. But basically, if you just do a Google search for me, I'm going to pop up there. So you'll be able to find me.
Beautiful. Well, it's been great having you as a guest and great learning a little bit about what makes you tick and really, whether you know it or not, really great shining a light on your extraordinary spectacularity. Really has been. And,
Thank you very much.
Your level of articulation, your level of thoughtfulness, your level of humor, like bringing, a lightheartedness to difficult topics, and then really opening up what it means to be a thriving screenwriter, someone who's done actually very well in the land of angels and the city of angels, I should say. And congratulations, like really, whatever it took, whatever it takes to, and pretty soon, I want to wish you well on the job that you still haven't yet found.
That's right. Eventually.
Yeah, congratulations for that too. I think,
whatever that's going to be.
yeah, I got this idea. It's coming around the corner. And, I'm thinking of opening up a coffee shop one day in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I think you'll be the first guy I reach out to.
I will absolutely be there. I'll be frapping all over the place with my frappuccinos. That's probably not the correct way of phrasing that. By the way, just one other thing I want to say to everybody out there who is creative and who is artists, which I basically include as everybody. Do not ever, 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 ever underestimate the impact that your passion and creativity can have on the world. Mm-hmm. Never underestimate that. You are more than just a butterfly wing. You are an amazing force. And just as a quick example, as you know, one of the shows that I was a co-exec producer on was the show Xena Warrior Princess. Mm-hmm. And that show, with everybody's combined talent, with Lucy and Renee and all the wonderful talents we had, all the way down to the people working on the set, the producers, the writers, the directors, that show inspired a group of fans, we call them the Xenites, for our show. And those Xena fans have become incredibly passionate about charity. They use our show as a basis for a lot of their giving. And they've humbled me, as with most fandoms who believe in that and push the charity. And it really came out of people getting together and being creative and creating this spirit of giving. So anytime I hear somebody say they can't change the world, I'm just going to write this, I'm just going to paint this, I'm just going to take a photo of this, but I'm not looking to change the world. Well, don't make it your object that you're going to try to change the world, but understand that creativity, the passion, the artwork, and the abstract thinking that human beings have, that's what created this world. So you are a component to it. I'm sorry to get kind of philosophically passionate about that, but it's something I believe to my core, and it goes right back to when people say no. The moment they say no, they've robbed us of what they were going to contribute. So there you go.
Thank you. And thanks, Stephen Sears, for being a guest on the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It's really been a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to be with you today. I wish you the very best. Let's stay in touch. I look forward to our friendship moving forward.
Cool.
And and just super cool being with you. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And to all you out there, thanks for hanging on to this point. What a cool interview. Whatever you got going on, it's really all good. Even the bad stuff is all good. It's sort of what we pointed to here today. It's like, I'm not telling you to wish for bad things, but the stuff that's painful, the stuff that's confusing, the stuff that leaves you dejected or disempowered, that's all part of this experience of being humans, and we share it together. So welcome to humanity. It really has been a pleasure to be with you. I wish you the very best, and we'll catch you on the flip side of the next episode. Bye for now.
Hey, welcome to Humanity family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. That's DRFRED at welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to humanity.